Lesson 1, Comparing Fractions. This is the most important lesson in the book because it shows students why conversion matters. Let's get started. A prerequisite skill that students need is knowing the factors of 100. So let's take care of that in part 1. The factors of 100 in pairs and in the correct order are 1 and 100, because 1 times 100 gives you 100. Next we have 2 and 50, 4 and 25. Next is 5 and 20. And finally we have 10 and 10, because 10 times 10 gives you 100. Let's move on to part 2. Here we'll be comparing fractions, and it says, Anna, Betty, Christy, Daisy, Emily, and Francine take 6 different tests, and they earned the scores shown below. Anna's test had 4 questions, and she got 3 correct. Daisy's test had 2 questions, and she got 1 correct. Christy scored 7 out of 10 questions on her test. Daisy got 14 correct out of 20. Emily got 20 out of 25 correct. And finally, Francine got 39 out of 50 questions on her test. In part A, students list the number of problems that each student got correct. So Anna got 3 questions correct. Betty got 1 question correct. Christy, 7. Daisy got 14 questions correct. Emily is 20. And Francine got 39 questions correct. Now for part B. In this row, we're going to write down how many questions each student got wrong. So since Anna got 3 questions correct out of 4 total, that means she got 1 of them wrong. Write it down. Betty got 1 correct out of 2. That means she got 1 wrong. Next, Christy got 7 correct out of 10, which means 3 of them were wrong. Daisy got 6 wrong. Emily got 5 wrong. And Francine, 39 correct out of 50. And 50 minus 39 gives you 11 questions wrong. Here's part C. With a partner, students have to decide which student above has the highest grade based on this information that we wrote down, and they have to be able to defend their answer. Before they start discussing though, I'll let them know some of my thoughts. So I'll explain, well, maybe Francine has the highest score because she had the most questions correct. She got 39 questions correct on her test. But at the same time, she did have the most questions wrong. She had 11 questions wrong on her test. So maybe Betty is the one with the highest grade because she only got 1 question wrong on her test. But then again, she did only get 1 question correct, so how can that be the highest grade? And with that, I'll let them start their discussion. And after a couple of minutes, they'll come to the conclusion that it's really hard to tell which student had the best grade. So I'll ask them, why is that so? And they'll tell me, well, every student is taking a different test. Anna's test had 4 questions. Betty's test had only 2 questions. Christy's test had 10 questions. So that makes it really complicated to compare between the different students. And that's when we move on to letter D. It says, find the scores if they had taken the same 100 question test. So in this box, we'll write blank over 100, blank over 100, and blank over 100 all the way through, because we're going to see what it would be like if each student took the same 100 question test. And now for Anna, her test had 4 questions in it. And how do we turn that into a 100 question test? Use this chart to help you if you need help. And we can take the 4, multiply it by 25, and that'll give us 100. So I'll write times 25, do the same thing in the numerator, just like we did in the fractions and proportions units. Now look at Betty. Her test had 2 questions. How do we turn it into a 100 question test. We do that by multiplying by 50. Next, here's Christy. Her test had 10 questions. So turn it into a 100 question test by multiplying by 10. Do the same thing in the numerator. Daisy, multiplied by 5. Emily, her test had 25 questions. Let's multiply it by 4 to make it a 100 question test. And finally, Francine had 50 questions, so multiply by 2. Now let's do the calculations. Here's Anna. 3 times 25 gives me 75, so I'll write it down. 4 times 25 is 100. We'll write it down, and it's already there, so we know we're doing it correctly. Let's move on to Betty. 1 times 50 is 50. 2 times 50 is 100, and it's already there. Christy, 7 times 10 is 70. Daisy, 14 times 5 gives us 70. Emily, 20 times 4 is 80. And Francine, 39 times 2 gives us 78. Let's move on to part E. Now that we have this new information and we had everyone take the same 100 question test, let's see if the questions in part E are easier to answer. So here, who had the highest score? And now it's much easier to see that Emily had the highest score. So we'll write down her name. Who had the lowest score? And now it's easy to see that Betty had the lowest score of 50 out of 100. Next question, who had the same score? And here we can see that Christy and Daisy had the same score of 70 out of 100. Christy and Daisy. And now, why is it now easier to answer these questions? And students will tell me that since everyone is taking the same 100 question test, that makes it easier to compare. So I'll write that down. Let's move on to box F. Here it says to convert, and students should do this with their teacher or their parent because we're going to walk them through some logic. Let's start with the first box that belongs to Anna. So if she had taken a 100 question test, she would have gotten 75 out of 100 correct. And this fraction can also be read as 75 divided by 100 or 75 per 100. So on this first line, we'll write down 75 per 100. Here's the next step. The Spanish word for 100 is 100. So on the next line, instead of writing 75 per 100, we're going to write down 75 per 100, just like this. 75 per 100. So line 2, 75 per 100. And students will say, that sounds like 75%, which is the math term that we're looking for line 3. So on the third line, write down 75%, just like this, and spell it out. And another way of writing 75% is to write it using the symbol. So here's 75%. And that's what students are familiar with seeing. And this helps students make a really important connection. When they see the value 75%, it just means 75 per 100 or 75 per 100. Let's move on to the next example. Here's Betty's score. If she took a 100 question test, she would have gotten 50 out of 100 correct. And this can be read as 50 divided by 100 or 50 per 100. So that goes on the first line. 50 per 100. The Spanish word for 100 is 100. So instead of 50 per 100, we'll write 50 per cien. Let's move on to the third line. 50 per cien sounds like 50%. So that goes on line 3. And 50% can be written as 50%. So 50% just means 50 per 100. In the next box, we'll learn the conversion shortcut and go straight to the percentage. So in this first example, since percent means per 100, as long as you have a fraction over 100, you can convert directly to the percentage. So here, 75 per 100 is 75%. 50 per 100 is 50%. What's 70 per 100? And that gives us 70%. Again, 70 per 100 is 70%. Next, 80 per 100, 80%. And finally, 78 per 100, 78%. So that's how we convert a fraction over 100 directly into a percentage. Let's look at the last line. Here, a percentage is simply a fraction out of 100. And the Spanish word for 100 is cien. And that is lesson 1.